So I think you guys have probably seen this up here, and you each have one of these that Jim, our tech guru, designed for us. We had a complaint that the microphones weren't loud enough, so in order to beef up the volume of them, we're limiting the number of people that can talk. So before they were just automatic, you'd start to talk and they'd come on. Now you actually have to push the button in front of you in order to talk. So only 3 people can talk at once. Not that you could hear if 3 people were talking at once, but 3 people can talk at once. Once the 4th one connects, the first one will be disconnected. So if you don't want Troy to talk, hit it. Make sure 4 of you hit it. Does anybody have any questions? It's pretty self-explanatory. You'll see the red light come up. If it comes up, you're on. If it's not up, you're not on. Cool? Okay. Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem.
All right, with that, we'll move on to regular business. Approval of the agenda. There's one change, item C under new business. We are, Tricia's sick, so we're not going to do that one. So aside from that. Bruce and, okay, John. All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, motion carries. Approval of August 13th minutes. Any correction?
Move to approve.
Okay, we have David and Donna to motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, director's report.
We successfully made the change to the county's IT department. As a result, we have all new email addresses and all new phone numbers, and as soon as we have complete access to the website, we'll get those posted for you. And also, the City of Wichita City Council approved the fiscal agent agreement by and between the city and WAMPO. That means the city will continue to upfront our expenses for the month. When we get reimbursed from KDOT after we file our reimbursement request, then we pay the city back. They charge us a nominal administrative fee interest rate, and it's much cheaper than we could get through a banking organization. So those are the big items that have taken place.
Questions? If not, moving on, the consent agenda. Any questions on that or thing to be pulled off? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
Move to approve.
Okay, David and James, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Public comment, anybody from the public would like to address the board, now would be the time. Okay, moving on. 2018 audit presentation, Mike Lowry with AGH.
Good afternoon, Mike Lowry with Allen Gibbs and Hulick. We were engaged to audit the financial statements of the organization for 2018 and then also a single audit in accordance with the uniform guidance. The audit standards require that we communicate certain matters related to the audit to the governing body, and we do that via a letter that we send. You should have received a copy today. I will give everybody a heads up that the governance letter that we're talking about today, the results of the findings, the financial statements, and the single audit are in draft form. We are substantially complete, I would say 99% complete. We are waiting on the return of 2 legal letters, but we do not anticipate anything that you have today will change. If that is the case, there's always the potential that one of the attorneys could identify some type of legal contingency that needs to be reflected in the financial statements. However, based on the transactions that we saw related to those attorneys, we don't think that's going to happen. So, just a note that you are looking at what I would say 99% complete drafts. So the letter that you received, I'm not going to cover everything in that letter, but I am going to hit the highlights. We are required to let the governing body know if the organization adopted any new accounting policies in the current year. The answer to that is no. There is an accounting estimate in the financial statements. Not all the numbers are hard and fast numbers. There is one, what we call a significant estimate, which relates to compensated absences for unused vacation. So at the end of the year, employees that have vacation that is accrued, that is reflected as a liability in the financial statements. As a basis for our conclusion, we do reperform the calculations that were done by the organization on the estimated liability, as well as verify wage rates and trace those back to source documents. And we do concur with the estimate that the organization has developed for compensated absences. We did not have any uncorrected misstatements. So from time to time, when we are done with the audit, there might be a few errors that management decides not to fix, and we concur because they're just not material to the financial statements, and the administrative burden of fixing them or the time involved would not really add any value to the financial statements. We do track those from year to year because they actually get corrected in the following year, but there were none of those uncorrected misstatements. We did have a few audit adjustments that we made to the trial balance that was presented to us to do our audit. Flip back over to that page. Those audit adjustments related to payroll, some invoices that had been recorded in the 2019 year, but their service dates were actually related to 2018, so we had to put those back on the books, and then to adjust accounts receivable based on some confirmation information that we received. The net impact of all of those audit adjustments resulted in approximately $164,000 decrease to net position. We also did have some financial statement findings. I'll just take a minute and explain the types of findings. So there in general are three types of findings or control deficiencies. There's the generic control deficiency, there's what we call a significant deficiency, and there's what we call a material weakness. Now, the only difference between the control deficiency, the significant deficiency, and the material weakness is simply the dollars involved or exposed to those transactions. So the higher level or more money that you're dealing with, as that goes up, the severity of that control deficiency goes up, okay? So the three financial statements findings that we had all three were material weaknesses. And they were related to the organization's segregations of duties and control environment and payroll processing. And anyone who would like to speak with me about the details of those findings, I'll be happy to either do a phone call or meet with you on those findings. That being said, just because there were material weakness findings doesn't mean we can't offer a clean opinion on the financial statements, which we have done. So WAMPO has received an unqualified opinion on the financial statements. That is the highest level of opinion that you can receive for an audit. And you might ask yourself, well, how can you do that if there were three material weaknesses? Well, we are opining on the fact that the financial statements accurately reflect the books and records. And in our opinion, the financial statements do accurately reflect the books and records. What the material weaknesses present is the possibility that throughout the years throughout the year, having a material weakness in your internal controls raises the level of the possibility that you can record errors in the financial statements that would potentially misstate the financial statements. Now, hopefully during the audit, all of those are caught. And in this case, we believe that we discovered every error related to those material weaknesses and corrected those in the financial statements. So the financial statements audit did receive a clean opinion. Any questions on that part before I move on to the single audit, which is the audit of federal expenditures? All right. Any non-federal entity that expends $750,000 more in expenses in a year, and again, it's the money that you spend in a given year, not what you receive in federal funds in a given year, but what you spend. So if a non-federal entity expends $750,000 or more in a given year, that does trigger a single audit. A single audit simply means that we have to audit the federal expenditures in conjunction with auditing the financial statements, and we just talked about the financial statement audit. Just a quick note. So we don't audit 100% of the federal expenditures. We are required to base our audit on a risk-based approach, and that means really if the entity is high risk versus low risk. If the entity is low risk, for example, we're only required to audit 20% of the federal expenditures. If the entity is high risk, we are required to audit 40% of the expenditures. WAMPO does qualify as a high-risk audit, but that being said, its major government program is the Metropolitan Transportation Planning Grant, which is a majority of the federal expenditure. So we end up selecting that grant to audit, which is way more than 40% of the expenditures. It's 80 or 90% of the federal expenditure. So as it relates to the single audit, we also did have some findings in those areas. We had three material weaknesses related to the single audit, related to the compliance with the federal expenditures of the transportation grant. As part of our audit, we do issue two opinions. We issue an opinion over the financial statements, and as I mentioned earlier, that was an unqualified or clean opinion, if you will. For the single audit, we also issue an opinion, and that opinion was unqualified as well, so it's still a clean opinion. Again, I will repeat, even though we had the material weaknesses related to compliance of federal funds, we were able to audit those thoroughly and able to issue a clean opinion. Now, having three material weaknesses show up in the organization's single audit report, will raise the transparency level of the organization to the feds. And I think, in the past, I think this year KDOT came in and did some oversight. So I would anticipate that probably happens again this year as well. So any questions over the single audit? And again, if anybody has any questions about the details of the findings, I'll be happy to meet with them and discuss those findings as well. Any questions?
Well, thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we will receive and file the audit and go from there. Thank you. Oh, well, that's true. Once we receive it, we'll come back and bring it as.
Yeah, we do anticipate having the finals available within about a week.
Okay, we'll just receive it next month. Thanks for pointing that out. Appreciate it. Mike, you're up for the long-range plan update. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Feels like a rare podium appearance for me. I'm not sure the last time I've addressed this group, so for that I apologize. Been at the podium a lot these last few weeks with our statewide tour. Again, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, members and guests. Good afternoon, WAMPO staff as well. Again, Mike Moriarty, KDOT. Agenda item before you is, I'm going to call this a brief update on our long-range transportation plan updates. We're kind of on the front end right now, so there's not a whole lot to talk about, but I'll give you as much of the highlights as I possibly can. And we are planning on a more thorough, robust update, maybe in November, December, something like that. So we'll work with staff and sort that out. So I am pleased to report in May of this year, KDOT did officially kick off our long-range transportation plan update. Our last update was in 2008, so it's certainly been a minute since our last statewide planning process. And again, as I had alluded, we're on the front end. If you're looking for hard-hitting content and findings, we're just not there yet, but we're well on our way. Some of the background on the mechanics of this update. So this will be an 18-month planning process, and we'll set a 25-year vision for the state's transportation system. The plan itself will consider all aspects of our transportation network and hopefully the various forces that influence travel patterns and how we move. So at the end of the day, this will be a comprehensive plan built from a meaningful process that details goals, objectives, policies, and performance measures that will guide future transportation investments in Kansas. We have engaged some national expertise on this project. The plan is being led by the High Street Consulting Group. They have particular expertise in DOT planning, strategic planning, finance, things of that nature. So we're excited to have them on board. We have some more local expertise on the project as well. H&TB and Burns and McDonnell, the ETC Institute, they're kind of a polling and survey company out of Kansas City. And then Single Wing Creative is going to help us with all of our fancy graphics. I should probably note, typically with state DOT plans, these are not project-based like you might see in the MPO area. Ours are more policy-based. And really right now, we're kind of at that conversation phase, trying to give us a sense what the needs are statewide, what our financial resources might look like, things like that. So again, kind of on that front end. We do have an advisory committee in place right now. I am pleased to report. The committee was selected to be a good geographic representation of the state of Kansas. We also try to get a good cross-section of industry and governmental, different levels of government as well. I will get a copy of that list sent out to this group. I'm not sure if we've actually shared that yet with this with WAMPO. So we'll make sure to get that sent out. So as you might expect, we also envision a thoughtful and sustained stakeholder involvement piece throughout the planning process. And again, that really is our focus right now. Data collection, stakeholder connection. That's what we are focusing on right now. And again, to better understand our system needs, our stakeholder needs as well, that should give us a solid foundation to craft this plan from. So many of you maybe were able to attend our recent local consult event here in Wichita, perhaps up in Hutchinson as well. So these were part of our statewide listening tour, what we've historically referred to as local consult. Kansas has actually stepped up in a big way for this effort. We had 1,100 people attend this statewide tour. Previous years, we were down around 700-800, something like that. So a very marked increase in attendance from years past. We've also set up a local consult website with meeting summaries, project lists, handouts, things like that from these events. And we're going to get that link sent out after today's meeting as well. I do want to comment briefly on the Wichita event. I thought that was a pretty good event. There was a lot of emphasis on highway conversations, which is probably to be expected on some level. There was also a lot of dialogue about freight, aviation, multimodal solutions, ped bike. So we really enjoyed the conversations we had here in Wichita. I think technology was hit on quite a bit in this region as well during these events. I do also want to announce an upcoming second round of local consult. That'll be late October and into November. So, just clear your calendars for 6 weeks or so. We anticipate the conversation at this next round to focus more on regional priorities. We've also been trying to do some project scoring at KDOT. So we have some preliminary project scores we'd like to share with people as well. And we're also going to start to talk about some regional spending ranges as well in terms of KDOT funding. So with that, I can certainly stand for any questions.
Question. Thank you, Mike.
All right.
Appreciate it. Okay, item D, Chris, major regional priorities.
Thank you. This actually dovetails quite nicely on Mike's discussion there of the KDOT local consult. So last month, this body adopted this ranked list of major regional priorities. It's sort of the culmination of an effort that had gone on for a couple of months here. However, you guys did ask that we put this on the agenda again for the following month, potentially to make some adjustments to this list. So that's part of why we're here. The other reason why we're here is after doing a bit more analysis on the staff side, we have an idea that we wanted to run by you for sort of how to present this, how to bring this information across in the long-range plan. And actually, before I go to that slide, looking at the numbers, the rankings based on the voting by the TPB members, the biggest thing that stands out is the North Junction is far and away the most important project. It was, I think everybody in the room had it on their list. And it had more than half of people, of the individuals on the board, had it in the #1 spot. So huge difference between that and any of the other projects. So it is clearly the #1 regional priority. As you get further down the list, though, the differences between different projects start getting closer and closer together. And for instance, the difference in ranking between number 7 on that list and number 12 is like 0.12 points out of the 5. So once you get down the list, they kind of get compressed together. So what staff were looking at, there are sort of 2 natural breakpoints on this list. There's kind of a gap between items 6 and 7 and a gap between items 12 and 13. So the way we were thinking about presenting this information in MTP, rather than that 15-item ranked list, is divided into tiers. The North Junction is clearly the top priority, so that will get very strong mention, sort of get pride of place here. The rest of those top 6 items sort of round out the top tier. So we have North Junction, then the other tier 1 projects. We'd group items 7 through 12 as sort of the tier 2 projects. And then there's these last 3 projects that really had, all of them had some support, but did not have very, very broad support among the board. So this is just sort of our idea for how we would present this, rather than that full 15-item list, which is a bit overwhelming to confront the reader with. So that's just what staff had in mind for this. As mentioned before, the board asked that we bring this back to you for any potential adjustments or additions to this list going forward.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I want to start out on the one that the East Kellogg from 96 to Andover Road. That really needs to be Prairie Creek, which is 1 mile east of there, because if we stop it at Andover Road, you're going to have the same problem that we have at 143rd now, and is growing I was through that intersection, 143rd and Kellogg, and it was backed up, the traffic was backed up onto 96, clear back on the curve back to the bridge. So I think we're going to create another North Junction on the east side if we don't extend that out. And I thought that sort of, weren't we on that? We talked about it at one point. And then my other question, since I wasn't here last month, the 235 in Kellogg Phase 2, I was thinking the state was thinking that was, we'd made so many vast improvements on that wasn't quite a priority with y'all. Am I wrong on that, or Corey? I'd be sure and hit the button.
So when we talked about it last time, I mentioned that I thought East Kellogg would give us issues prior to 235 Phase 2.
Any other discussion on the priorities? David?
Well, I'll say the same thing I said last month. I don't believe the process that we went through was a valid process to begin with. I believe having things like the number 2 on there at 235 and Kellogg Phase 2 is completely erroneous. That should not be the 2 priority. I'd put it down there below electric charging almost. There are, if we looked at what really impacts our region economically and what we need, the way that we did it with us just sitting down with a piece of paper and jotting down some numbers, I think is absolutely the wrong way to prioritize this. And I have absolutely no faith in the priorities that we have.
Suggestions on how you'd like to do it in the future?
I think we need to sit down and discuss it and then put together some documents that show what each of these have based on whether or not it's a regional priority, whether or not it has economic benefit, have some criteria that we're coming up with to make some decisions. We don't just take a piece of paper and jot down 1 through 15 and say this is our priorities.
Comments by any other member?
Well, from the look of the list here, it seems to be that this list is following our community improvement plan that's been adopted by our planning department as far as taking care of what we have now and not expanding too much what we don't have because of growth patterns in the community and that sort of thing. So from what I understand, that some of these priorities, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but some of these priorities are following that community improvement plan based on, our regional planning department. Am I incorrect on that?
There are some of them that are included in the CIP, yes.
So if I started talking, is somebody gonna push their button?
Depends on.
I have to keep my finger on this the whole time. All right. Well, with what David said, I certainly too agree in the concept that what we went through was maybe the start of a discussion or debate on, or more information on the different projects instead of just sitting down and writing a list and calling it good. The way it landed, as James had pointed out, does look very close. But again, this type of a process that we went through is actually a very common tool used to come up with a list like this, but never is it the definitive list. So I guess I feel like maybe a facilitation of what the results were and a little bit more discussion between all of us and a debate back and forth over priority levels would probably be smart. Probably sooner rather than later, but probably not today, because I don't think anybody's prepared for that kind of a conversation, particularly today. So that's kind of where I land on this. Very similar to what David said.
I have one other comment. It's really difficult to rate these highway projects with pedestrian walkways and technology projects. I don't know if there's a thought about splitting these into different categories. Just want to know some thought on that.
Brent, we had previously talked about perhaps divvying up by percentage of the money to the different types of projects. And I remember myself being somewhat against that because I didn't feel like it just getting little pots of money and then calling it, specific for that, for passenger or for walking versus, the roads was necessarily appropriate based on the amount of money we had, but it's certainly worth looking into categorizing them and maybe pulling those off as subtypes of projects.
I would comment that, a process for sure could be improved. I've always felt that, like if somebody was a sponsor and I know TAC, this is kind of getting into the TAC world in a way, the TAC committee, but if we've got these 15 projects and for instance, your example of 235 and Kellogg Phase 2, maybe we could have a presentation that's not a lengthy one, but a 5-minute summary of, what were the improvements that, what was the traffic counts and accident counts before the Phase 1 happened? How great is it now? And is phase two really necessary, because I don't think we all had enough information to be able to properly guide it. Could give an update on, for instance, everybody probably wonders where like passenger rail sits, or K-254 with their recent accidents, things like that that has happened. So I agree with Troy that we could improve the process but it is, the policy body did vote last month, and I respect the policy body. I do kind of, I like that you put top priority by a single item up there, and then other priority ones and twos and threes. I like that concept. I guess it is debatable about what project fits in what category, but for us as a unified policy body to understand exactly what regional bike ped network means, we probably all see a map and see what our WAMPO boundaries are and how it connects into going east or going north into Newton area or whatever. So, but that's going to take a little work. And if you individually felt compelled to argue or present for or against a project, then I think either a member of your, like if your city engineer or somebody would want to come up and present something, really more of a high level view for us all to have because I never understood ARC 95 until I finally kind of saw a map and what populations are you connecting and what's the challenge. Didn't realize the river was a expensive challenge, those kind of things. And I think that's what would help us all. That's my comments.
So,
Just to finish up, we needed some type of criteria on how we judge each one of these projects. And we had no criteria. We have a piece of paper with 15 or so things on it, and we number them 1 through 15 or 1 through 5 or however we did it last month. That's not criteria. That's not making a judgment based on what is the most needed things that we have in this region. So that's why I'm completely against the way we did it. I don't believe in the process we went through. I don't believe in that we looked at any kind of criteria. I didn't believe we looked at any way to prioritize these. I am just very disappointed in the process.
I would say, kind of in that vein, it would be nice as, in the future, as we're trying to decide on projects, so maybe see some data behind some of the projects. Traffic, I think somebody mentioned traffic counts, accident counts. Is it causing a major bottleneck? Is it keeping us from getting to some of the smaller communities? Is it making commute times longer? We talk about inside the city of Wichita, 15 minutes to anywhere, but for those people that live outside of the city of Wichita, in the outer portions of our region, that can make a big deal. So seeing some data behind some of these, I think would help. I think we're making some emotional decisions. And if we truly want to be prioritizing for what's best for the whole region, I think some data on some of these projects. I'm sure TAC probably sees way more data than we do. But it just like, I think, almost called him council member, Commissioner Meissner said, just a brief 5-10 minute kind of synopsis of why these are being presented as options.
well, and perhaps instead of trying to tackle all 15 items at once, we do it over a 2 or 3 month period and do like 5, and just give us, like, say, a short synopsis on those 5. And then as we build that, because let's face it, if we tried to go through that whole list in one meeting, we'd all be, number one, you wouldn't remember what number 1 was and number 15, So I think what we need to do in the future, for next year's priority list, or how long is this set for, Chris?
Well, we didn't set it for a specific term, and I suppose there's a couple of options here. One is if the policy body wants to revisit this in the relatively short term, we could do something before the final draft of the MTP comes out. That would require a new decision probably by January at the latest. Second option would be to do something sometime next year and incorporate that as an amendment to the new MTP after it's adopted. And of course, the last option is to just keep this list fixed until sometime in the future after that, either if there's an external reason for change or at the very latest when we're updating our MTP come 2025. So depending on the will of this body, we could pursue any of those options.
I might suggest that we start, like, take the top priority, which we don't need to discuss, we all know that one, but other tier 1 and tier 2 is to go through in the next 3 months and have, you know, a fourth of them each, or a third of them each month for the next 3 months, and in January come back and reprioritize. We get too many, 15's too many. So if we cut it down to tier 1, tier 2, and then just take the top 4 each month, give us a breakdown, 5-minute, you know, it didn't have to be a 20-minute, 30-minute presentation, but a fairly detailed, you know, what you can do in a few minutes, and then at the end of the process, then we'll address it and take it from there. This can be our short term, and then we'll readdress in January for a longer term one. Does that sound reasonable to folks?
Yeah, can I add, Dan, please? And then add and then question. And also what we should be looking at is what is the cost estimate of that project? And is this a 2-year window, or is this a 10 or 15-year wish list? So we need to have a cost and time frame as part of it. But my other question is, were we doing this to submit, how important is it that WAMPO's on record to KDOT with all the, like what you guys are doing right now? Or can we remain neutral as you're working through all this, or that's my question.
Yeah, so, and that was a comment I wanted to try and make. I'm not really sure what our timing is, but if we're coming out in October, November, and we're starting conversations about regional priorities and project scoring and things like that, the more information that we can have from agencies here in this region, I think that helps us make better decisions in this metro.
Well, obviously with you and Brent and you guys that are around here, you understand it more regionally, but statewide, I'm not sure. Like, I totally agree with a healthy conversation or data about the 235 phase 2 is, I mean, that's just good for the state to have that. And we shouldn't push something through that maybe not need to, or it may elevate itself that, hey, this really is more important than we thought.
Well, and as we start to score projects too, it may start to shed some of the light on some of the metrics for each of the projects as well. Because a lot of the things we're talking about here, traffic counts, safety, total investment, those are things that we consider as we go through our scoring process, in addition to economic impact and things like that. So it's possible that we could help to start to shed some light on this conversation here in fairly short order on at least some of these projects.
Mike, do you have a time frame for when the state will have done that for these projects?
It won't be for all the projects.
For the ones that the state would be in a position to do.
Yeah, I don't have a precise time frame. I would say by the end of this month, we should be in a pretty good spot in terms of what some of our scoring is starting to look like. Through our statewide tour, we learned of some new projects that folks were thinking about. So we're trying to get those inserted into our existing list of projects. We're also trying to refine and update our project scoring process at the same time, which on a statewide, on the enterprise scale, that's kind of a big deal for us. So there's a lot of balls in the air right now, but I think by the end of this month, we'll be in a little better spot from that standpoint.
So if just one piece of information first, we have provided this list as the policy body adopted it last month to the Chamber's Transportation Group, just as input for their, I know they were going to do some project prioritization. At this point, unless the policy body acts, this would be the list that would sort of serve to inform KDOT at their next round of local consult meetings. If KDOT can provide, maybe by the next policy body meeting next month, some information based on their scoring criteria for the projects where that's applicable, applicable that might be useful for this group if they wanted to make any changes before the next local consult meeting, before we would have had a chance to do these several months of presentations and a more in-depth revision of the list.
So our next round of local consult probably won't start till towards the end of October. I can't commit for us to be in a position to share anything of any real value by the next board meeting. You may not want to count on us for that,
Understood.
but it's a great thought.
If we can get it, I mean, like I said, we got to we are somewhat under the gun. We do have a priority list that can be for, like I said, short term, what goes in, and then we look on a long term. Because if your plan is like what we're trying to do instead of saying just because it's in year 1 or year 9, because in 2 years things may change. So, okay. We can readopt, but it also puts us in a position for future discussion on how to do it and come up with a more comprehensive or a better laid out plan. Go ahead, Mike.
And one last point, just we're sort of starting the conversation here in October and November about projects and priorities. This isn't the only time that we're going to talk about. This is a lengthy process for the plan update, project selection, things like that. So there's no great impotence to get this done now, but it would certainly be of value to start thinking about it sooner than later.
Based on what's been said, should we move the I-235 and Kellogg Phase 2 all the way to Tier 3 anyway, right now?
I don't have an objection to that, but that's just me.
I would make that motion.
Okay, you got it. Okay, we have a motion and a second to, the motion is to take I-235 and Kellogg Phase 2 off of the Tier 1 projects and move it down to Tier 3. Any discussion on that?
We've had a few people already mention that. That's actually not even needed now based on the numbers that have come back after the Phase 1 had been completed.
So one item on the Phase 2. Phase 1 project took out the clover leaves, four clover leaves right there. Took out 2 of them, so the merging movements are gone. So there's more area to merge and come in to the interchange. Built a couple of the flyovers. The next phase really builds the rest of the flyovers over top. They go on top of the current flyovers out there, so you have 4 high structures. It's a pretty tall interchange. So with the merging movements on top taken out, the thought was that this project may solve 80% of the issues on Kellogg. We'd have to go back and study it again to see what those improvements really are now, but that was the thought at the time.
Seems
So-
kind of sudden to be all of a sudden making that decision without better data.
But we didn't have any data when we made the decision that we have here. We just wrote some numbers down on a piece of paper.
Well, so let's not make any decisions the same way today. I mean, I could probably take one of these on here I don't like and pick it and make a motion to move it. Let's get some data behind this, find out why, that is where it is, and then we can make the decision over the next 4 months or whatever. We were just told that. This list can change. I can't support the motion.
Okay, Tom.
I'd like to say, talking back, I'm trying to go from memory, but I think North Junction was on there, 135, Phase 1 and 235 Kellogg, Phase 1 and Phase 2 was an issue on there. East and West Kellogg were on there, Northwest Bypass. We've kicked Northwest Bypass off. Now we've got a couple other things on here that are priorities, more priority, or, newer priorities. I'd like to know how much KDOT spent on Kellogg and 235 on engineering on Phase 2, or have they done anything yet?
All the right-of-way for the full project was purchased at the time. Engineering for bridge work, design work, I'd have to go back and look, but I can't imagine that we took it to any more than right-of-way.
As we go through these and try to change our priorities, we need to make sure somebody hasn't spent money on them first.
Well, and James made a good point, and right, wrong, or indifferent. I mean, we do have a motion and a second on the floor to remove that. I think certainly, if more data is available, that we can vote on it and then bring back more data and then make another vote on it, or any other options from folks?
I just think we need to make informed decisions and not emotional decisions. And we can be informed. We have time to change this document. There's no emergency here. I think Commissioner Dennis's points are well taken. And I think everybody is seeing some wisdom there. And I think we need to take the time to research each one of these projects and make informed decisions. That's just my only point, so.
I agree. I won't support the motion because, again, we're not making the motion based on any kind of data. And we need all of this stuff with some criteria and how we can evaluate each one of these. And that's not the way we've done it up to this point. So that's why I couldn't support this motion, because again, it's being made without data, without criteria, without a reason for this.
I love how everybody says I didn't have a reason to make the motion. It's not true. It was brought up. There were different things that were said about this specific project that would have pushed it way out of a tier 1 priority. And it's been said by multiple people with some data and information. So that's not a fair point at all. And the other thing is, we said we were going to turn this in as is right now to the state to look at until we come back with a different priority. There is no emotion to that. It was the only one that had actually been talked about today. And when talked about, it was talked about how it shouldn't be there. And as part of this board, I care, but it's not like I had anything against it. So when I brought my motion, I brought it with meaning, and I'm not going to drop my motions. That's how I'll leave it.
I'd like to maybe make a substitute motion that we instruct the TAC to take that item by itself and report back with all of the dialogue we've had about that intersection and that future, so we'd have informed information by next meeting, which might fit still within Mike and Brent's timeframe.
Second.
We still have that one motion, and then, so we can vote on that motion, and we can come back, and if it does not pass, then we'll do a subsequent motion on sending it to TAC for additional information. David?
If Commissioner Meitzner would amend that, the TAC look at all of these and bring back so that we can make an informed decision, I'd rather see it go that direction than we just pick one out of it.
Well, and I'm, because that's let's face it, I mean, most of us sitting around this board are elected or politicians or appointed from a political aspect, where the TAC generally has our professional staff, engineers and whatnot, and they can provide some additional data for us. So we have a motion on the floor to remove 235 and Kellogg Phase 2. So we're going to vote on that, and then we're going to, then we'll move on from that point in time. Okay, so the motion is to remove that from tier 1 to tier 3. All those in favor say aye. Or show of hands, because it's going to be a contest. Okay, we have 3, so those opposed? The rest. So motion failed. Now we have a subsequent motion to send the, I believe it, Pete, you'd like to rephrase it to send the list to the TAC and ask them for a recommendation.
Yeah, I'll change my motion to ask the TAC to deliver us a brief synopsis on each of these in summary.
I second that.
Okay, so now the motion is we're going to send this list in just a second to TAC and have them bring back a recommendation to us at that time. And follow-up question, Tom?
What kind of time frame? We're not going to do this in one meeting, so by the end of the year or November? What? Okay.
Yeah, as long as, I think we are, so we're still back to that January timeline when we make another decision. I think this, what the state, I mean, our number one priority is North Junction. That hasn't changed. That's not going to change. The rest of those issues, I think, are items being discussed not only by this board, but the other boards at a state. So we can, you know, at that time and amend, like I said, you're going to be looking at it for years to come. So I think we all know where our top priority, and then we'll go from there. So are there any other discussion on the motion? If not.
Well, with
yes,
North
Donna.
Junction being number one, the criteria is, even though it needs to be updated, is what you're really evaluating with the rest of them. Is that correct? I mean, or using the similar criteria?
I believe, yes, that I mean, they're going to come out and look at, I think, the numbers, traffic counts, safety issues, this, that, and the other thing, and then bring back a recommendation to us.
Will we be refreshed on the North Junction with current figures? I mean, that's Don't
And I think that.
grab the neck.
I think the chamber,
Don't choke it.
I think Brett and the chamber group will have all that information, so we don't have to try to reinvent it when it's already been churned.
Does everyone have that information available where they can look at it right now? I don't think so. I mean, I just think we all need to be on the same page, and I agree with Commissioner Dennis, but we still need to be refreshed on all of these so we know where we stand.
I need to say something here because over the past 3 years, we've tried to give you all kinds of criteria in the form of performance measures for safety, fatality accidents, for population projections, for land uses, the different changes that are taking place. The city and county amending the comprehensive plan to talk about infill developments, those kinds of things. Each one of these projects has been talked about in project selection criteria, all of these different things, and they do have criteria set up for project selection when it comes to picking projects for the next MTP. So it's not like we haven't talked about criteria or the basis for criteria over the past 3 years, because we have.
All right, with that, we have a motion to send the list to the TAC and bring back recommendations on each project. So all those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on.
But before we move on, and this doesn't require action, but I would like the sense of the board is in addition, does the board want to take this to TAC instead of hearing itself about these items over the next few months? Or would the board like to both hear presentations on these items at our next few meetings and get the TAC's opinion? Just staff need to know which way we're going with that.
I think if we're gonna be asked to vote again on it, we need to hear the presentations.
I'm sorry, what, if you, I didn't quite catch all
I
this.
said, I think if we're gonna be expected to vote again on this in priority and have criteria, then we should have that presentation and not just the TAC.
All right, then we'll have, based on that, we'll have TAC make presentations as before and we'll do that in 1 month and then, or a couple of months, and then we'll make the decision after that. So we're not gonna try and do it all in one meeting. So we'll do it over a couple of months, even if it's not January, but at least we have something to work with that we can turn in, and then we go from there. Okay? That's short term. We'll look at the long term first of the year.
Thank you.
Next item is, the regional significance definition. Phil?
Included in your packet is a copy of the definition for regional significance. And the reason we're doing this is to develop and try to meet the FHWA tenets for regionally significance in terms of project selection and investment choices. We're also trying to align with the recently adopted 5 guiding principles for the MTT development that you all adopted. We're also trying to align with recently adopted funding buckets that you recently adopted. And we're trying to incorporate a definition that considers land uses, economic possibilities related to infrastructure, ensuring that the transportation provides optimum access to those in most need, and provides a broader spectrum of transportation possibilities to meet the changing future. In terms of policies, the primary question is what's affordable while meeting the policy and background stipulations of the definition. We're also looking at what might change the current indicators associated with demographics, land use changes, financial possibilities based on a lot of unknowns right now, and what types of choices the new and maturing generations will want in terms of infrastructure and mode choices. Staff also tried to develop a set of minimum thresholds for regional significance, which is included in your packet. And we're also trying to just provide the definition that meets the basics of what's today, what we need to be in the future, and what kind of tools we're going to have to get there. This definition was reviewed by both the PAC and the TAC committees. And our options today are to approve the definition as submitted, to approve the definition with specific changes, or to not approve. And staff would recommend you approve the definition submitted. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? I'd entertain a motion to accept. We have a motion and a second to accept as presented. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Committee, executive committee met. We are working to, we met and Chad has accepted the offer of the $115,000 plus $300 a month for travel and $2,000 moving expense, which was brought up at the last meeting. The executive committee will be meeting to try and come up with priorities, so we could evaluate them in 6 months as requested by this board last month. And that's all we have talked about at this point in time. So I'll move on to TAC.
I don't have anything to report this month.
Chad, you have anything, or Tom, you gonna do it?
I just have a couple of things with the green project. They happened this weekend, so if you're watching this on TV, it's probably over. But for the sake of this live meeting, this weekend, we'll be placing steel beams on a bridge, the I-235 northbound bridge over Broadway. And when you swing those beams, you do not want vehicles going underneath them. So we will be closing Broadway, let's say Thursday night, the 12th, from 7 p.m. till 6 a.m. on Friday morning. Reopen it for the daytime on Friday and do it again on Friday night from 7 p.m. till sometime Saturday to get those beams in place on that bridge. Secondly, to realign traffic lanes on northbound I-235, a complete closure, once again, of northbound I-235 northbound will occur this weekend, September 13th through the 15th, beginning at 9 p.m. on Friday the 13th and reopening hopefully on Sunday before the 6 a.m. Monday morning deadline. So a marked detour will be in place for both of those items. And that's really the particulars that I have for this week. Any questions? Yes.
My question is it the last announcement, was that on 135 or 235?
That is 235, the green project.
That's what I thought.
And just on the northbound side.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. Mike?
Nothing further for me.
Thank you. The other folks aren't here. Do we have any other business to be addressed by the board? If not, we stand adjourned.